Hi, my name is Jackie. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 8. I play hard because that's how I do everything. I always push myself to be the best that I can be. Type 1 diabetes does not stop me from doing the things that I like to do. Hello and welcome to Teen 1D, the podcast for teenagers and young adults living with type 1 diabetes. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medicine advice or treatment. My guest for today's episode is Liz Craft. Liz Craft is a TV writer and producer living in Los Angeles. She's the co-host of two successful podcasts, Happier with Gretchen Rubin and Happier in Hollywood. Liz, along with her writing partner, Sarah Fane, has been a TV writer and producer for many television shows, including the reboot of Fantasy Island, which is currently airing on Fox, The Fix, which Liz and Sarah Fane co-wrote and created with Marcia Clark, the final two seasons of Angel, the Emmy Award-winning TV show, The Shield, Women's Murder Club, The Vampire Diaries, Lie to Me, and The Family. Hi, Liz. Welcome to Teen 1D. It's so nice to meet you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
My podcast is aimed at teenagers and young adults, so let's start discussing where did you grow up and where did you go to college?
I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, so a fellow Midwesterner, and I went to college at Columbia University in New York.
When you were in high school, did you know where you wanted to go to college or what you wanted to study?
I loved New York City. I had gone with my family and absolutely loved it. So when I found out that there was this great college there, I really set my mind on that probably my junior year in high school. It turned out great because New York is very expensive, so it was a good place to go to live as a student.
What was your first job after you graduated?
I stayed in New York and I worked at a place that published young adult novels. I was a receptionist. And I happen to love reading young adult novels. So it worked out great for me because I was sort of surrounded by things I loved and I learned about the publishing business.
Did you want to write books at that time?
You know, I didn't know I did, but once I started working there, I realized, hey, I could do this. And so I did actually start writing for them eventually.
Could you share with us what sort of things that you wrote?
Yeah, so I wrote, I also became an editor there. So I edited these books and wrote outlines for books called Sweet Valley High, which you may be too young to have heard of, but they were a very famous series of books when I was in high school. And I wrote numerous young adult books for them that were, just a lot about friendship and first love and that kind of thing.
So how and when did you decide to move to California?
Well, let's see, I was 28, still living in New York, writing young adult books. And one of my best friends, Sarah Fane, was moving from a grad school in North Carolina to Los Angeles. She wanted to write movies and she had gone to grad school. And we met up in Kansas City over Christmas for drinks. And we always joke, beer one, I said, I'm going to come visit you for like 3 weeks. And then end of beer two, I said, I'm going to move. And it sort of came about that way. I had started realizing that television writing was a thing that people did. And so I had this vague notion that I wanted to move from young adult book writing to TV writing, but I really did not know a lot about it.
Can you describe for us what it means to be a TV writer and what you have to do in that career?
Yes. So being a TV writer, a lot of it is about being a producer, actually. So in television, the creator or showrunner of the show hires a staff of people. And you come in and you sit in a room. This is for many shows. And you talk about each episode, and then you plot out the episode on a big whiteboard or on some sort of computer program, whatever the showrunner likes to use, figuring out, okay, what's going to happen in each scene of the TV show. And then whoever's episode it is, whichever writer goes off and writes the script, which is usually about 55 pages for drama, which is what I do. There's hour long and half hour. And usually people write one or the other. And I write 1 hour drama. And then once it's written and rewritten, it's a long notes process. Then you've got to cast the guest stars. You have to like figure out the props with the prop master. So it's then you're producing a show. It's sort of like, let's put on a show. And there's about 250 people involved. It's a big collaboration.
So then how do you learn to be a TV writer?
It's kind of on the job training. There are classes you can take outside of any college system, or you can study it. Like I think at USC, you could study it. But really, the best thing to do for many people is to get a job as an assistant or a production assistant in the room. We call in the room the writing process I was talking about, where we're all discussing the episodes. And it's sort of like you're there, and it's you absorb all of this knowledge just from hearing people all day, every day talking about it. And then you practice. And I recommend to everybody to have a writing group. A group of people at your level who are all writing scripts, and you read each other's scripts and give each other feedback. And that's a great way to improve.
Do you work for an employer when you're a TV writer, or are you independently employed?
It's kind of a combination. Many of us sort of have our own companies, but then that company is hired by, let's say, Disney or Warner Brothers or Sony to work on a particular show. And a lot of times the jobs don't last very long. So we actually move around quite a bit.
So you talked about your writing group. Is it normal for most TV writers to have a writing partner or a group? And how long have you been working with Sarah Fane as your writing partner?
So, well, Sarah and I have been writing partners for over 20 years, believe it or not. We went to high school together. So, as I mentioned, so we actually wrote articles together for our high school newspaper. So we've been together for a long time. I think writing partners used to be more common. They're less common now. I think because the business has changed, and frankly, it's harder to make money. And when you have a partner, you're splitting your paycheck. So, it's a big deal to split your paycheck with somebody. And then writer groups are very common among young aspiring writers, like, 20 somethings who move to LA to be writers. Yes, most of them get in writers groups because, one, it's a great way to improve your writing, and it's also a great way to make friends.
So what makes you and Sarah work so well together as TV writers?
It's an interesting question. I think it's two things. I think one, we trust each other totally because, we really grew up together since we were 14. And then also we have the same level of ambition. And I think when you're working with someone, whether it's as a writing partner or some other endeavor, you need to have the same goals, because if one person's goal is, okay, I really want to make this my career, and the other person is like, well, this is fun to do on the weekends, you're not going to put in the same amount of time. So for anybody out there thinking about partnering up, I always say the number one question is, what is your ambition level and does it match?
So when you two have an issue on where you think the story would go, how do you handle that?
Oh my gosh. Of course, we've had many issues over the years. It's funny because we argue a lot less now than we used to. I guess we're sort of like an old married couple who's like figured out our conflicts. And what we've realized over the years is that the thing that works best is the person who's most passionate wins the argument. So whoever cares more creatively wins. Now, having said that, I should say, I mentioned rewriting. Much of TV writing, or any writing, of course, is rewriting. So it very often comes to pass that whatever the point is of that argument, we'll end up completely changing that story point anyway, either to what the other person wanted or to some completely other idea. So it doesn't make sense to get too caught up in arguments as you're going along, because things are so fluid.
So at what point in your life were you diagnosed with type 1?
I was 34 when I was diagnosed. So I was not diagnosed in childhood as so many are.
What caused you to think that something might be wrong?
It's funny. I was working at a show called The Shield, which was extremely stressful and long hours. I didn't feel good, but I really attributed it to the show. But I was so tired, and I would fall asleep during the day at work, like it'd be in the room and I would nod off. I would have trouble even like lifting a coffee pot, it would be like, oh my God, I can't do this. And in the shower, I would get exhausted. I lost a lot of weight, like 20 pounds without trying, but I was so into my job. I didn't even like think that was a symptom of anything being wrong. I also lost a lot of hair. And when I really got worried, and I've never figured out why this happened, like my tongue turned green. I like looked.
That is definitely a new one.
Yeah, I was like, what is going on? And I, like many young people in in my early 30s working, I didn't go to the doctor regularly. And I finally went, and as it's very easy to diagnose it's just a simple blood test. And they were surprised because, again, of my age. And they thought, well, this is strange, but in fact, that is what it was.
Did you have any concerns about continuing your job as a writer when you were diagnosed?
Not really. I mean, I think I was overwhelmed, as anyone is when they get that diagnosis, but it never occurred to me to sort of change anything, like my career.
Yeah, you talked about the fact that being a TV writer can be stressful. Do you find that has an effect on your blood sugar?
Yes. And it's not good. I mean, I have to say, the more stressed I am, the more trouble I have controlling my blood sugar. Now, I'm in constant conversation with my doctor about this. I can't quite figure out if it's sort of cortisol, like actual stress causing high blood sugar, I think is probably part of it. And then also, of course, when you're stressed and you're working, your schedule isn't regular, it's harder to eat well and to remember to do the insulin at the right time. And all of those things that like everybody deals with, and I'm sure young people with diabetes struggle with, are the exact same things that I struggle with as an adult. Like, I probably have an easier time remembering to take my medication and, things like that, but it is a struggle. And the harder I'm working, the more of a struggle it is. That is true.
How do you manage your blood sugar? Do you use pens, insulin pump, or a closed loop system?
I use insulin pens, and then I have a wireless glucose monitor. I have the Dexcom 6. And that was the real game changer for me, is getting that wireless monitor. Not having to prick your fingers all the time. I mean, it's just so much better. And I have it, as I'm sure many of us do, connected to my phone. So I can look at it, anytime. And that really helps.
Do other writers in the writing room or people on set know that you have type 1? And if they do you find that that's helpful?
I tell people sort of as it comes up. Of course, my writing partner knows, so she would sort of know if something was going wrong. I don't hide it. And I tell people if it seems relevant. We all try to plan our lives so that we don't have these blood sugar crashes, but it does happen where suddenly you feel that, sweating and all of that. And oh my God, I have to eat something. And I'll just say, oh, excuse me, I'm a type 1 diabetic. Sometimes I have to like eat a little something. I'm going to just have a, chocolate bar or, whatever, piece of chocolate or whatever it is. But I'd share it sort of just when it feels relevant, put it that way.
Thank you so much for that. And just going back to what you were talking about earlier, we've talked about where you grew up and how you ended up in California. Let's fast forward to today. You and your writing partner, Sarah Fane, have a television series, Fantasy Island, that is the reboot of the iconic 70s show, Fantasy Island. The TV show airs every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Fox. For those teenagers and young adults in our audience who have not yet watched this new version of Fantasy Island, or the original Fantasy Island, can you tell us about the premise of the show?
Yes. So Fantasy Island is a place where guests come to a very private resort, and they can have, they tell the host, or who we call the guardian of the island, Elena Rourke, Ms. Rourke, their fantasy. And it can be anything from a tired, harried mother who just wants rest, to somebody who wants the ultimate adventure, to somebody in our pilot episode, a woman who wanted to be able to eat as much as she wanted and not gain weight. So the fantasy can be anything, and then the island fulfills the fantasy for the guests, but it's never what they think it will be. And so they sort of end up getting what they need as opposed to what they want. We like to say that every guest has a reckoning at some point during their fantasy where they have to sort of face their own demons, and it leads to hopefully a transformation, and they leave the island better and happier than they came.
How did you decide that you wanted to write for this show?
The company Fox really wanted to reboot the show because it was hugely popular in the 70s. And this company, Sony, was making it, and we have a relationship with them from past projects. And so they came to us and asked us if we had a take, if we wanted to pitch a take to Fox. And Sarah and I were huge fans of the show growing up. And so we said, yes, we would love to do that. And the original had 2 men at the helm. We decided, we wanted to do it now with 2 women. And so we pitched our take with 2 women, and Fox really took to it, and they signed on for a straight to series order, which is unusual. Usually you make the first episode and they see if they like that, and then they ordered it. But because of the nature of the show and the deal that they made, they ordered 10 episodes. So that was really exciting.
At what point do you hire additional writers to help writing the show episodes? And what do you look for while you're hiring them?
We hired them, in this case, once we got the green light for the series for season 1, is when we hire a staff, and we have a budget. And so we hire different levels of writers, less experienced to more experienced. And we look for different things. First and foremost, we want good writers. So we read scripts. That's sort of the process. When people are hiring, they get sent a whole bunch of sample scripts or people's pilots, whatever it is. And you read those. So a great writer, and in this case, people who could write something, not just like a cop show, but different kinds of writing, because of course there are many different kinds of fantasies. So you need to have some flexibility in the kind of writing you do. And we look for a diverse point of view. We don't want everyone in the writer's room to be just like us. We want to have different points of view, and as well, people that we like, because we spend a lot of time with them. So we meet with people, and it's funny because our job interviews aren't like what you think of as a typical job interview. Our job interviews are often just very much like conversation, where we're getting to know someone, because we already know if we like their writing. So now we're judging if we feel like we can communicate well. Our job interviews feel more like a cocktail party conversation.
So I also learned while doing research for this that you're filming in Puerto Rico.
Yes.
How did you choose that as a location to film?
So we went to Puerto Rico because Fantasy Island takes place on a gorgeous tropical island, which Puerto Rico is. And there were actually quite a few shows surprisingly shoot there. So they had the infrastructure, the great line producer, they have cameramen, they have, wardrobe people, all of the different elements, casting directors that we need. And they have great tax credits. So one thing you really look for when you're making a TV show is how can you maximize the money that appears on screen, and going somewhere with tax credits is hugely helpful. So Puerto Rico, because they want people to shoot there, have made it very cost effective to shoot there with tax credits. That's also true like in Vancouver. A lot of shows, like a lot of the CW shows, shoot in Vancouver for the same reason.
What was it like to spend a long period of time there?
It was fun. We shot at a resort, the Grand Hyatt Reserve, I believe it's called, in Rio Grande. And I had a room right on the beach. So my room looked out onto the ocean, which was wonderful. What was hard about it was I was away from my husband and my son for 9 weeks, which was really rough. But my son did not want to miss school because his school had just gone back to in-person learning.
Oh, yeah, that's completely understandable.
Yeah, so he did not want to come and do any online learning. He wanted to be at school. So I was on my own. That was rough. And then the other thing I will say is living at a resort is not great, again, for type 1 diabetics. Eating room service and eating, like from the little sandwich shop and all of that. It was really hard for the diabetes. And I must say, my A1C definitely went up while I was there.
Yeah, that's completely understandable.
Yeah.
Where else have you filmed while working on these other shows?
Oh my gosh. Well, Vancouver, as I mentioned, which is a great place to shoot. We've been lucky to shoot a lot in Los Angeles, which is nice because then you never have to, leave your family. Probably the most far-flung place we've shot is Hungary. We went to Budapest to do a pilot. It didn't end up going to series. It was a pilot based on a book, a very popular young adult book called The Selection, but it did not go to series. But that was an experience. We spent, I think, about 6 weeks in Hungary.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
So you met your husband, Adam, on the show The Shield. What is it like to work with your husband on a TV show? And have you worked again together?
Yes, it was a great place to get to know someone because you spend so much time together that before we even started dating, I felt like I knew him really well. So that was exciting. And of course, it made work very exciting to be falling in love with someone. It was easy to work with him then because, of course, I met him on a job. So we were used to working together. What's interesting is since then, we had never worked together again until Fantasy Island. He wrote one of the episodes. He wrote episode 8. So we had that experience of working together again. And it was fun. I mean, I said to him, now, if you write this episode, you're going to have to get notes from me. Because what happens is you write an episode and then the showrunner, who in this case was Sarah and I were the showrunners, have to give notes. And then when you're a writer, even though your job is to get notes and to take criticism, it still can be a tough process. One thing I should mention is sometimes in television, you have just a staff who does all the writing. And sometimes you also have freelance episodes where you hire someone outside of the staff to do an episode. And that's what this was with Adam. So he had to come in and be with everybody on Zoom and figure out his episode. And it went really well. And it was fun because, it gives him an investment in the show. It made him more interested in the show. It was something for us to do together. And because we'd been apart so much, it was nice to have work connecting us.
You also talked about criticism right there. And I just thought that was interesting to hear about. Do you have any advice on how to deal with that?
Oh boy. So yeah, Sarah and I always say our job is to take criticism, essentially. That is the whole job. You have layers and layers of people giving you criticism, which is true in many professions. A few things help. One, realizing it's not personal. Everybody gets criticism. It doesn't mean that you're not smart or you're not good. What really helps me is remembering that if you're not doing something to open yourself up to criticism, you're not doing something. Whenever you put yourself out there, you can get criticism. Just doing a podcast, right? You're opening yourself up to all sorts of people having issues with your podcast and your content and what you're putting out there. But, what's the alternative? Not doing a podcast, not speaking, not being heard. So I just remind myself, look, like whatever I'm doing, at least I'm doing something,
Yeah.
and you take criticism and you just continue on. And you can take a moment to sort of feel bad or to pout or to rant to a friend about this, why you think it's wrong. And then we regroup and we move forward. And, it's very helpful to have a partner for that purpose because with Sarah and I, we're able to process it together. And I do think that's really helpful for both of us. But if you don't have a partner and you're getting criticism for whatever reason, I think it's really helpful to talk to someone you trust and just vent and then move on.
And so going back to what you just mentioned earlier, you talked about having a podcast and opening yourself up for judgment. How did you get involved with the Happier podcast with Gretchen Rubin?
Okay, so Gretchen Rubin is my sister, and she's been a writer about good habits and happiness for many years. She wrote a book called The Happiness Project, which was a big bestseller 10 years ago. And Gretchen and I had always had these long conversations on the phone about happiness. And she would call me to like talk about her work and ask me questions because we're very different. So she was looking for a different point of view. And I always said, oh, we should have a radio show because we love talking so much. And she's like, well, what would we talk about? And I said, I don't know, but something. You're in New York, I'm in LA. We're both writers. We can figure out something to talk about. And then she was approached to do a podcast about happiness and good habits. And they said, it can be really helpful to have a co-host if there's someone you think would be good to host this with you. And she said, I know the perfect person. It has to be my sister. And so she said to me, do you want to do this? She said, I have to tell you, I don't know if it's going to be a success. It could be a huge flop. We could be really embarrassed. But again, we were like, well, worst case, we're embarrassed. We'll survive being embarrassed if it's a flop. And we did it. And it really resonated, luckily for us, with listeners. And we've been doing it, I think like 5 years now. And then I had thought, as Gretchen and I were doing it, like, well, Sarah and I could do a podcast about being writers in Hollywood because that's a subject a lot of people are interested in. And so then we started Happier in Hollywood as a spinoff. And we've been doing it for several years. And yeah, if anyone, by the way, is interested in these topics we're talking about, like criticism and the writer's room and all of that, Sarah and I talk, that's a lot of what we talk about on Happier in Hollywood. And so for me, it's been wonderful because it's just another way to connect with people. In TV writing, you just write something and it goes on the air and you can get comments, but it's not like podcasting where you really have that interaction with listeners, which is so satisfying.
Yeah. And we're about to the end, but I'm going to ask you a couple more questions.
Sure.
You and Sarah have the motto, it's a fun job and we enjoy it. How did this motto come about and how do you use it in everyday life?
It's funny because the motto came about because we were actually not having a fun time. We were doing Women's Murder Club and we were having a lot of issues because there's always, making a TV show is very difficult and there's always a lot of struggle involved. And we kind of took a moment and said, wait a second, let's remember, we're making TV. This is a fun job. This is a dream job for us. This is what we wanted to do. This is what we worked so hard for. And it's television, for goodness sake. So let's just remember that it's a fun job and we enjoy it. And let's bring that attitude into our day. And that's how the motto came about. And I said that to Sarah, and then she was so taken with it. She went and had signs made for us, for each of our offices to say it's a fun job and I enjoy it. That's been our motto since like 2007. And when we developed the podcast, we thought, okay, that's got to be, our tagline. And it helps us to remember in those times when it doesn't feel fun, that this is what we want to do.
Yeah, I know that both you and your sister Gretchen Rubin and your writing partner Sarah Fane also pick a word or a motto for the year. So what are your words and mottos for this year, 2021?
So 2021, my word is butterfly. And that's because I felt like coming out of COVID and being home, I want to be a social butterfly and I want to spread my wings and see people. And I also want to shed my cocoon, the cocoon of extra weight that I put on during the pandemic. Because as you know, it's not good for extra, belly fat, especially is not good for one's A1C. So I really wanted to get rid of that. Limited success so far, but I'm still hopeful.
You've also talked about manifesting things into your life. What are a couple of things that you've manifested?
Well, it started with, I mentioned the Sweet Valley High books that I edited. When I was in like middle school, I loved reading Sweet Valley High. And I had a teacher who really didn't like me reading these books. And she said, Liz, those books are trash and they're going to rot your brain. Why are you reading them? And then I felt great vindication when all those years later, I had a job editing them. I brought that job into my life because I loved young adult books and I brought it in. And then another time that I felt I manifested was, and sometimes it takes years, by the way. This isn't like weeks. This can be, you got to be patient when you're trying to manifest. But one thing that was interesting is I was really interested in the O.J. Simpson case when it was in 1993. And it was a huge, it was sort of the first 24/7 news coverage court case, and I watched the whole trial. And Marcia Clark was the prosecutor in the case, and I was very interested in her, and I read her book, and I read a few books about the trial. And then all these years later, I ended up with Sarah creating a show with Marcia. And here she was, someone who I had been so interested in and studied. And then there I was in my office, her sitting across from me, and we ended up working together for years and creating a show together and becoming very good friends. So I always say to Sarah, watch out for what I want, because it's going to show up. I mean, Puerto Rico, I had been saying to Sarah for years, I want to shoot a show in a tropical location. I'm dying to go spend time in a tropical location. And, I brought it to us, and we ended up on Fantasy Island. So, we joke about it. I think it's like, if you put your energy where your interests lie, even if your interests seem like they don't lead anywhere, the truth is they can, in ways that you don't expect.
Yes. And our final question, do you have any advice just in general for anyone who might be listening to this?
Well, my advice is, since it's a podcast for young people, is to, follow what you want to do, even if you feel unqualified, because the truth is, people aren't necessarily qualified to do anything until they do it. I have a mentor who says, I've never gotten a job I was qualified for. I always had to learn on the job, And so I think, like, whatever you want to do, just do it. And it's okay if you go in feeling like unqualified, scared, nervous, self-conscious. Just do it anyway. That would be my advice.
Okay. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Yes, my pleasure, Jackie. It was so much fun.
All right. Thank you. That's all for today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's all for today. If you have any suggestions for future topics or guests, or just want to say hi, don't hesitate to reach out. You can email me at teen.teen1d@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram at teen1dpodcast. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, as it really does help me out. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to tune into next week's episode. Have a great week. Bye.